Hi. So in our last video we talked about this. This is a Game Boy Color that I gave a pretty massive overhaul in the last video. So I replaced the shell, buttons, membranes, pretty much everything about this Game Boy except for the motherboard and the screen. But in the end it was just turning some screws and replacing some parts. So I also promised to do something a little more ambitious in this next video. And if you ever had one of these, or these in particular, you probably remember that these had one massive downside. Their screens absolutely suck in the dark. In anything but perfect daylight, it would be impossible to play on these, except for when you had these extra peripherals like a magnifying glass that snapped on top of here with lights built in. Those magnifying glasses also ate up an extra 2 AA batteries on top of the 4 that are already in here. So our parents hated the entirety of that construction. God, I feel so old having to explain that. But these days there are much better solutions for that issue. So I ordered another Game Boy. I had to promise my wife that it would be the last one, for now. So this is a Game Boy Advance. It's one of the last Game Boys that ever came out before they moved on to the Nintendo DS line. It had a wider screen and a bit of updated graphics. But it also did not have backlighting still. But these days you can order kits for this with an IPS screen. And IPS is pretty much the technology that you'll find in cell phones, tablets, or other handheld devices these days. So a much higher resolution, backlights, high quality screen to replace this one. So that's what we'll be looking at in this video. We'll be replacing the screen, buttons, shell, membranes, pretty much everything you see here except for the motherboard that is inside. So that's a little more ambitious than the last one with a much more satisfying result in the end. So I'll also be showing a comparison from this screen to the new screen, and you'll probably see that it is a massive difference. So let's dive in. Okay, so to start off with this project, let's quickly go over all the components that you need for a project like this. For starters, there's obviously your donor Game Boy. You want to pick this up on an auction website or a second-hand platform from, well, another user. These things don't have to be in mint condition or even in good condition. Actually, this one has scuffs on the side, a scratched up screen, the battery lid was missing, it's dirty all around. And the seller actually said that the screen was broken, but I already managed to fix that by taking this apart once and taking a look at the inner ribbon cable. So I got this pretty cheap, and it doesn't really matter that it's pretty cheap since I will only be using the PCB that's inside, and that is obviously working well. So let's put that to the side already. Other parts I got was this case. Since I went for a all white look last time, I wanted to go for an all black look this time. Sadly, this was being sold with gray membranes and buttons, but since I wanted an all black look, I also got black buttons and black membranes. It's important to also get black membranes since the start and select button that are on here, so these two, are actually included with your membranes and not your buttons. So it would have looked a little silly if I did not get the membranes and only the buttons. So I also ordered those in black. So this will look pretty sweet if you ask me. Next part is the main attraction for this video actually. So this is a IPS screen. This was all included in one kit. It actually even came with the screwdrivers, which are useful for putting this together. But in this box that is nicely padded for the journey from China to Belgium, there's obviously a screen lens. And then there's this little bag that has the display. So in here are a few spacers to put the screen in place, which are these transparent little things that are sticking in the bag right now. So these. There's also a PCB, which is this one. This is a pretty important piece of the kit, since this is actually translating the signal from the analog Game Boy to the digital display. So make sure to be careful with this. And then there's also an adhesive to stick it in the case. There's also a sticker that goes on the back of your display to make sure nothing shorts out. There's also some padding in here, and then the main attraction is obviously this display. So this is an IPS display. It's very high pixel density. It's backlit, so this will probably look pretty sweet once we're done with this project. Okay, so to get started with this, first step is actually taking this apart. I have gone over how that works in a previous video, so I will be speeding up this process a little, to the point where we have the PCB. Just one thing that's important for this is that you need tri-wing screwdrivers for these screws, since they are not exactly default screws. But if you ordered the kit that I ordered, there are actually screwdrivers included with a tri-wing in it. So I will be linking that kit in the description below if that helps anyone out. So let's get started on this. Okay, so once you've taken this apart, the main thing that you need is obviously this PCB, which will be cleaned up in a minute. But one thing that I didn't see actually in this package, it might be included somewhere, but I'm not entirely sure, is this LED cone. So this is a really small transparent bit that fits in this hole to just, make sure you see that it's lit on. So this channels the LED that is on this PCB somewhere. So that's something that will be set aside for later on. Besides that, there's not much that we need from this. I will be saving that for maybe another project, but we'll see about that. And then, we are basically just going to give this a cleanup. The main things you want to clean up on this are the little contact points for the buttons. You also may want to take a look at the battery contacts and, maybe brush out the little hole for the cartridge slot. So those are the main things you want to look at. You may also want to grease up a bit or put some isopropyl alcohol in the switches and this turning knob. So those are the main things I will be cleaning up. Like I said last time, I will be using isopropyl alcohol. So this is a 99.9% alcohol that basically just evaporates very fast and is pretty safe to use on a PCB like this. If I can give you one tip, don't do it with water. That's probably a bad idea inside electronics. So again, I will be speeding this process up since I already did this last time. There's not too much rocket science to it. So you basically just use a Q-tip, you put some isopropyl alcohol on it, and you go quickly over all the tidbits that you want to clean up on this. So I'll go ahead and do that, and we'll speed this up now. Okay, so there's one little optional step that you may want to do in between a few of these steps, and that's actually testing out this display. Since if this got damaged during transport or the vendor is selling you a bad screen or anything like that, once you glue it inside your new shell, it's probably going to be in there forever or be really hard to take out again. So what you may want to do is drop this PCB into the back of the shell. I took the old shell quickly for this. Put some batteries in here, quickly connect the little PCB with the ribbon cable on the back and plug in the little screen. And then when you use a little tool to switch this power button, you can see that the display works perfectly fine. So this step is entirely optional. You can do this, you can leave this out, but it's a little insurance policy that you're sure that this display works fine. So now I'm pretty confident to continue on with this build. Okay, so once you've cleaned up everything, we've gone over the parts, we actually tested the screen out in between now, then it's basically time to get started on assembly. You're going to want to start with the front part of your shell, which is this part. And something to note that's already important here is that this is actually a pre-cut shell. Since I bought this in a kit together with the screen, it's already cut off. You can see it a little bit here that it still has some bruises from where they actually modified this. Why is that necessary? Well, basically, I can quickly compare it here. If you would try and drop this screen into the original case, you'd actually bump into the sides here, since it would not have enough room to fit in here. So people that actually buy an original case have to Dremel or cut out a lot of these sides down here and on the side here, in order to make that screen fit in here. So when you actually buy a pre-cut shell, that's something that is no longer necessary, thankfully. So you could make it yourself a lot easier by just ordering one of these, or you could give it a go and cut an existing shell or a new one you buy online. But again, I'm efficient, so I just ordered a new one that is already cut. So step one in assembly is actually gluing in this adhesive that will actually keep the screen in place. This is actually pretty easy. You just have to peel off the sides. There we go. You're also going to want to take the center part out like that. And then we can just drop that in. This next part is actually we're going to use these little mounting brackets that we have right here. The other one is obviously still in the back. And then we're going to quickly peel off the back of this adhesive. Which is turning out to be a lot harder than I thought. Okay, so there we go. Okay, and so what you're going to want to do is put this big piece on the bottom here, like so, and this little piece on the sides, right there. And once you actually have those placed in, there's actually no wrong way to put this screen in, well, except for upside down, since they will be fit up snugly against these mounting brackets. So what you're going to want to do now is actually just drop the screen in. But one thing to definitely keep in mind before you do that is take off this protective film. If you leave the protective film on and then stick it in, you're going to have a bad time. So I'm just quickly going to peel this off right now. This is actually the most satisfying part of this build. And then I'm going to carefully drop this in right there. This is a tricky bit. making sure I don't break it. And there we go. It's actually in. Okay, so now we have the screen in there, as you can see. One thing I am going to do is quickly drop in this little protective layer again, so we don't damage the screen while working on this. And then for the next part, you're going to want to stick on this insulating tape on the back of it, since this is actually a metal surface and we're going to be mounting a PCB to the back of this. So you're going to want to stick that in. You're going to want to do it a lot more carefully than I did right now, but it's on the inside, so it doesn't actually matter all that much. And then you're going to want to place this PCB. I am going to stick this in. Remember when we punched out the middle of the adhesive for the display, we can actually still use this part, so I'm going to cut off a little strip of this in order to stick this to the back here. But before we do that, we're going to want to connect the screen up to make sure that these ports line up. So I'm quickly going to grab this port and press it onto this PCB like so. So there's not much to it. And then I'm going to cut a piece of this, stick this on here, and then paste this down. I also got a roll of Kapton tape, which is a special kind of tape that is particularly useful inside electronics, since this is a insulating heat and electricity. So I'm going to be covering up, well, this is basically just very fragile electronics, so I will be covering up all the bits and pieces so it doesn't really short out with anything else. So I'm quickly going to speed this up, since this is a pretty boring process. So I'll get to that now. So that's that. And then we can actually get started on the more complicated part of this build. Since I've already mentioned the little soldering pads that are on here, this is actually for the left trigger, right trigger, select, and there's actually also a ground pad, which we won't be using. But these actually will be connecting to the buttons on the PCB right here. In order to increase and decrease brightness when you hold select and press the shoulder triggers. So that's actually a really useful function of this PCB. But in order to do that, you have to solder in the 3 little wires that come in this bag between these little soldering pads and the different buttons on the PCB. This step is actually optional. If you're happy with the default brightness of this screen, you can skip this step entirely. But I'll quickly show how you do that. If you have a soldering iron and well, some soldering flux is pretty useful as well, then it's actually pretty easy to do. So I'll show how that works. Okay, so it's completely assembled now, or at least almost. We still have to drop in this lens and this sticker on the back. But before we get to that step, we're going to quickly test this out. So I have got 2 AA batteries. that we're going to place in there. We also have a Pokemon game. And then let's quickly switch this on. There we go. We're also quickly going to test out the brightness controls. Those seem to be working fine. So that's it. Okay, so now for the full disclosure, and I do have a confession to make about this. Right after I assembled this, I decided to give it a quick test run. So I flipped the switch to turn it on, and I basically immediately noticed that something was very wrong, and I must have screwed up something during the process. So I would flip it on, it would maybe work for a second, maybe even 10 seconds, maybe even a minute, but after that it would just cut power and start up again. So I was pretty sure that I did something wrong during the soldering or something like that. So I took it apart again. I've been troubleshooting for pretty much 5 hours. In that process of troubleshooting, I took it apart maybe like 30 to 50 times. And during one of those moments where I took it apart again, I basically screwed up the wires that were doing the brightness control parts, and I ripped off a copper pad that was holding it together. So that's something that is insanely hard to fix now. And after a short period of trying, I got over myself that brightness control was not something that was going to fit in this Game Boy. Only to discover in the very end that actually the power button was broken all along. So I took that power button apart, gave it a proper cleaning with a toothbrush and some isopropyl alcohol, and now this is working perfectly again, except for, well, the brightness controls that I broke while finding the problem. So that's a bit sad. It's also the first time that I did this, so that's something that I learned today and something that you can learn from this video. Make sure that you test out your Game Boy beforehand. Make sure that you fix everything that might be wrong once you've converted it into this. So then you can avoid the mistakes that I made with this. The only thing that is left to do now is glue on the lens on the front and stick a sticker on the back, and then I'm pretty much done with this. But yeah, now that I made the power button, we can give this a quick test again. And you can see that this works perfectly fine. I might swap out the power switch for a new power switch should this keep misbehaving. But that's something for another time and not for this video. So let's do these finishing touches, and then we'll have some close-ups of how this performs and what it looks like. Motherfucker!
What kind of music music? What's my favorite genre of fucking music? Tell me. What's my favorite